All right. Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Monica McCoubry and I am the Wildlife Education Specialist with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission located in the Lincoln office. And if you have joined us before, you know that this is our Science of kind of a webinar educational program series that we've been doing since about the beginning or middle of 2020-ish. And then it's just been really great and it's been very successful and people really like it. So we're going to continue it as long as y'all join us. And so thank you. We appreciate that. I do have a awesome moderator today that I'll let her introduce herself.
Awesome. Thanks, Monica. My name is Amber Schiltz. I'm the Wildlife Education Program Manager with our Fish and Wildlife Education Division at Game and Parks. And I'm happy to, this is one of my favorite topics, which is hard. We have lots of favorite topics as nature nerds, right? But I'm really excited to learn what you have to share, Monica. If anyone has questions throughout the program, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll do my best to either answer them or to make sure to let Monica answer them. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Amber. All right. So we'll go ahead and get started because I know that everyone's time is very valuable. So I appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and get started with our screen sharing ability here. All right, so like I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about rodents. And I think when a lot of people hear the word rodent or they talk about rodents, they think they're dirty, they're filthy, they're the mice and the rats and stuff, but there's a whole other group of rodents that always get overlooked. So today what we're going to be doing is talking about not only the mice and the rats, but also just the huge diversity that's not only in Nebraska, but also in the world. So talking about rodents today and some of the pros and cons about them in the ecosystem and what niche they fill. And then also talking about we have a lot of rodents. If you're not familiar with Nebraska, we have a ton of rodents. About a quarter of all of our mammals are considered in the Rodentia group, and we'll talk about that. But I do have some 5 or 6 rodents at the end that we're going to kind of go a little bit more in depth that are very specific to Nebraska. All right, if you've been on one of these before, you know, please, if you have questions, put them in the chat. Just make sure that they are topic related and that we are nice to everybody and we won't have any questions or comments or anything that is an issue. I also want to point out again that if you've joined these before, I do a ton of research for these programs, but I am by no means an expert in rodents or earthworms or geology or anything like that. I do a lot of like I said, a lot of research. I am an expert in conveying messages. So taking that information that biologists do and then conveying it to our public. But again, I'm not an expert on those species. So if you have questions that we cannot answer, I will do my best to find someone that can answer them. And then I will get back to you for sure. All right, so let's go ahead and dive on into rodents. Like I mentioned earlier, when people think of rodents, they think of like dirty and disease and transmissible diseases, and that's not true. Rodents are very unique and cool, and they have a lot of different adaptations that I want to talk to you about. So when we say rodent, there's a lot of different types. What are we mentioning? So in the world, there's about 2,000 living species, about 30 families. So like I mentioned earlier, in Nebraska, about a quarter of all of our animals are rodents, or all of our mammals are going to be rodents. They are the largest order in terms of what we talk about taxa. So that Rodentia group is the largest of all the mammals as far as the number of taxa that they have. The range in size, it's varied. Same within Nebraska. You know, we have very small things like harvest mice, and then we have beavers, and that's a huge range as far as weight and size. So within the world, there's a pygmy mouse that weighs about 5 kilograms, all the way to those capybaras, which they're kind of like the huge, I don't know how to describe them. They're like large rodents. They look like kind of like beavers without the tail. So they can get up to about 70 kilograms. So very, very large range in size. As far as where they're found, same thing. They are found just about everywhere. Antarctica, New Zealand actually does not have any rodents. And some of those oceanic islands, we'll talk about that a little bit later. They don't want them either. So they don't have them and they typically don't want them. And then I've mentioned this before, they are extremely diverse, not in only their size and their adaptations, but some of them are semi-aquatic. Some of them live in the desert, some live in rainforest, some are fossorial, which means they live underground, exclusively underground. But no matter what type of rodent or where they live or what their adaptations are, they have that common characteristic which is their teeth. So if you've ever looked at a rodent's teeth, like a hamster or a gerbil, you know that they have those kind of orange teeth. They are used for gnawing and chewing, and they have a large amount of iron. That's why they have those kind of orangey shade to them. So how did rodents evolve and adapt, and over time, how did we get to where we are? Early mammals, not necessarily true rodents, but rodent-like mammals, existed with the dinosaurs. So this is over 100 million years ago. But the first fossils of what we call now true rodents were not found until the late Paleocene epoch, which was about 66 million years ago. At the same time, when we kind of saw these rodent fossils, what else was happening was the extinction of the dinosaurs. So it made way for new amounts of mammals and new things to come about. Scientists believe that they evolved in Asia over time. And then the very oldest rodent fossil that was from South America was dated at 41 million years old. So we kind of, when Pangea was a thing, they moved around, but those are kind of the places they believe they started in Asia, but then they found one from South America that was about 41 million years old. So over time, they have been able to colonize new habitats and new territories. Basically, and we'll talk about this later, but they breed rapidly and they feed opportunistically. So they are quickly able to adapt to a very wide range of different habitats. So they've done fairly well as far as our mammals. All right, so there is also a little skepticism about what is a true rodent? We know rats and mice. That's usually if you walk up to the average person and say, what's a rodent? Probably a mouse or a rat. But we also have things like porcupines and beavers and squirrels and marmots and chinchillas, or if you have a hamster or a guinea pig, those are also going to be rodents. There's all these small kind of little brown animals or mammals, and people kind of group them with rodents, but they're actually not. So moles, they're in a different order. They are not rodents. Hedgehogs are also not rodents. Possums are not rodents. And then everyone also groups rabbits in with them. For a very long time, scientists believed that they were rodents and they were grouped with them. It's pretty recently that they have been moved to a new order. So they're what's called the lagomorphs or the Myomorpha group. Very similar as far as to tooth structure, but there are two tiny little teeth way back in their molars and by their premolars. So if you hold a rodent skull and a rabbit skull, they look very similar except for a couple of teeth in the back, which makes them different. All right, so when you look at a mammal, how do you know it's a rodent? Well, they're mammals, so they have hair, they're warm-blooded, they feed their young milk with their mammary glands, but the word rodent actually means to gnaw. And if you are familiar with them, if you've had rats and mice, you know that they have to constantly gnaw or chew on something. They look very different, but again, like I mentioned, all rodents will share very similar structures as far as their teeth and their skulls. All right, so that was just kind of like an intro to rodents. So we're going to talk a little bit more about where they live and some of those adaptations that they have. Are there any questions or anything before we dive on in?
Not so far. Someone asked about the role of rats with the black plague briefly. And I just mentioned that they were involved. It was specifically the fleas on the rats that carried the disease, but good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. We will talk a little bit more about that later on, but thank you for bringing that up because that's a lot of what people talk about. All right. So what do rodents eat? So just like their habitats are really diverse, their body sizes are diverse. Again, they're very diverse in what they eat. So most rodents in the world are going to be herbivorous. So they eat things like seeds, bark, plant materials. Some will also feed on insects. There's a grasshopper mouse, which we actually have here in Nebraska. They are carnivorous. So it is a true rodent, but they are going to be carnivorous. So their teeth are going to look a little bit differently. They eat things like insects, spiders, worms, scorpions, and even snakes. So very big difference between the seeds and the bark. And then the things that are associated oftentimes with people, like rats and mice, they are most likely omnivorous. So they're very opportunistic. So whatever they can find to eat is what they're going to eat. So it might be some grain and some seeds, but it could be some insects and some different types of things that are around your house. So they're very, very omnivorous. All right, so as far as their activity, are they out at night? Do they come out during the day? What's the difference? Well, again, very diverse is kind of just my catch-all for today. But rodents, they show a huge variety of activity patterns. Some of them are true diurnal. They come out during the daytime and they sleep at nighttime, but then others are nocturnal. If you look at a rodent, you can kind of tell. For instance, our flying squirrels that we have in Nebraska, they have huge eyes. That's because they are nocturnal. So when they come out at night, they have these very large eyes to let all the amount of light in that is possible to help them see in the dark. If they have smaller eyes, they're normally or typically you can assume that they come out, they're diurnal, they come out during the day. There are some rodents that hibernate. Some of them don't, some of them do. Things like prairie dogs, chipmunks, dormice. Some of these guys, they hibernate for 5 to 8 months out of the year, depending on where they're found. Here in Nebraska, our prairie dogs will also hibernate, probably not for 8 months because we do have some better weather, but they do hibernate all the same. There's also sometimes a dormancy depending on where these animals are, especially rodents that live in very hot areas. So what they will do in very cold areas, what they can do is this kind of short dormancy time. So if it's really hot or if it's really cold, they can go under, they can sleep for a couple days, and then they can come back out. This also gives them the opportunity to feed on some very low nutritional valued foods. It's basically enough for them to survive and not necessarily thrive until those conditions are better. All right, so how do they move? Again, it's very diverse. If you ask a normal person, what does a rodent look like when they move? You might hear the word scurrying. They kind of just scurry away. They also have, some of them, very elongated limbs, like your gerbils, kangaroo rats here in Nebraska, kind of out in western Nebraska. They have very, very long back feet. This is so that they can jump and kind of turn around and keep going. So they have very elongated limbs to jump. We have some true arboreal rodents, things like deer mice and tree voles and squirrels. They also have very sharp claws for climbing. But then you again have something like the flying squirrel. They have that patagium that we'll talk about, that kind of membrane extra skin that's around between their two front legs and their two back legs that they use to glide. So again, they have different adaptations for living where they do. We also have some rodents that will swim, things like muskrats and beavers and nutria. All of these things have very thick waterproof or water resistant coats that they use to be in the water. So we talked earlier about the hibernation. Things like beavers in Nebraska, they don't truly hibernate. So they have to build up those fat reserves and they have to have very thick, heavy coats so that they can survive in Nebraska waters during the winter time. And then we also have some burrowing animals, things like mole rats or things like pocket gophers. All of those things are very good. Sometimes they will even live exclusively underground like mole rats and they never come back out. All right, so what does their social behavior look like and a little bit of their reproduction? I could get into this. It's kind of hard to do it with rodents because they're so diverse. So I'm just kind of giving you the vague kind of surface level things on these. But some rodents are very solitary. Things like dormice and pocket gophers, they live underground. They will come up briefly to find a mate, and they will mate and then they go back under. They're kind of very just solitary animals. But a majority of our rodents do live with small groups. Usually those small groups are made up of their family members. So they will forage together, they defend their territories together. Things like ground squirrels and prairie dogs, they have certain communication that they talk about with each other. It's kind of cool that everyone thinks that prairie dogs are not the smartest things in the world, but their language that they have is so developed and so advanced. They have found that they can determine, let's say if a person walks through a prairie dog town wearing a blue coat, they could say this is a tan or this is a tall person with a blue coat. So they've determined that they have different squeaks and noises for different things that people wear, or determining what a person looks like or what a predator would look like. So very advanced. So they have those underground tunnels and chambers. Oftentimes they're very also advanced. So they have areas where they simply, this is the spot where we go to the bathroom. This is the spot where we have our babies. This is our tunnel to escape. This is our extra tunnel to escape. So it's not just a hole in the ground. It's a very structured system because they live their whole lives underground. There are also some rodents that make true nests. If you ever have heard of a peck rat, these things live in different areas of North America, but in the western areas of North America, researchers have found that they were so structured and packed in there that they can analyze the contents of the vegetation in there and check what the climate was like, what the vegetation was like up to about 50,000 years ago. So it's just simply using a pack rat nest, they can determine the climate and what the vegetation looked like long before those animals were even there. All right. This is an animal, I know we don't have them in Nebraska, but they are like a true anomaly of a rodent. So I wanted to talk about them a little bit. I know you've probably seen them at the zoo. We have them both at the Lincoln Zoo and the Omaha Zoo in Nebraska. They're, again, probably not the most cute or sexy looking things, but they do have a very interesting social structure. So they are eusocial, which means that they are the most extreme form of a social behavior amongst rodents. So overall, they live underground. They do not come up. They live exclusively underground. Some colonies have up to 70, but some researchers have found up to 275 have lived in a single area. The only problem is that they don't come up a lot and they don't disperse a lot. So one of the issues is these guys have very large amounts of inbreeding, just simply because they don't go anywhere. They stay within their groups and they mate within their groups and they die within their groups. So they unfortunately have a lot of those issues, but there is hopefully hope for them when they do go to places like those zoos. Something else that's also cool about them is they are the only, like I mentioned, they're eusocial. They are the only mammals that show a true caste system. So very similar to like an ant or a wasp or a bee. There's a queen, there's workers, very similar to that of this rodent. And that's the only rodent that does this. So there is a queen. It's usually fairly larger than the other workers or the other rodents that are living within that area. And if for some reason the queen dies, there will be a couple females that will literally fight to the death to become the next queen. And if you look, their teeth are fairly significant. They will use those teeth to like puncture each other's lungs and bite each other and like literally to the death until there is a new queen. Something that I also found that was kind of cool, once the queen kind of takes structure and takes hold, she will actually be able to sexually suppress non-breeding males and females, basically rendering them infertile and effectively preventing them from going through puberty because she is the only one that can reproduce. So she has that ability to do that. But researchers have found that if they take the males and females out of that caste system and move them to another one, they can regain those reproductive rights within about 8 days or so. So the female has such strong ties that she renders the rest of the workers basically infertile. So kind of a unique social system within a rodent, but they are also the longest living rodents in the world. They live to about 30 years. This is like crazy compared to like a mouse or a rat. They're true mammals, but they are technically, a lot of researchers have called them cold-blooded because they use the ambient temperature around them to determine what their body temperature is going to be. So if it's 60 degrees in a room, their body temperature is going to be 60 degrees. If it's 90 degrees, they're going to be 90 degrees. So they often have very close-knit groups where they thermoregulate to hold that body heat. And they also have these insane teeth. They can move them independently like chopsticks. And all of their muscle in their body, a fourth of their muscle mass is just in their jaws because they have to continuously dig and remove things. Their teeth are also situated outside of their lips. So what they can do is close them so they don't get dirt in their mouths when they're digging. And then they usually use their teeth to sense the world. So instead of touch or sight or anything like that, they use their teeth. So very interesting rodents. I know we don't have them in Nebraska, but I did want to cover them because they're freaking cool. And there has never been a naked mole rat that has been found with cancer. So they believe there's something in there. They don't know if they're immune or something in their body. They just have never found a naked mole rat that has died from cancer. So something to also think about as far as the medical world.
Monica, I have a quick question on naked mole rats.
Yeah.
Nancy asked, are they a mole or a rat? And I want to clarify with you because I know they're not a mole because moles are not rodents, but is their namesake, even they're not even closely related within the order of Rodentia, are they even closely related to rats or they're their own thing?
I think they're their own thing. I think they just got the name mole rat because of the digging and they look like a rat. I think that they're very, very similar or very, very different to other things, but that's a really good question. That's one of those like, I can't think of anything that has those kind of weird names, but it's like, they're neither this nor that. So yeah, good question.
Nancy. Thank you.
All right, so back to a little bit of rodent reproduction. Again, this is really diverse. It just depends on where they are. And usually the smaller rodents like the mice and rats, they have really high reproduction. They're prolific breeders. But offspring of any type of rodent, they can be altricial, which simply means that when they have young, they are born naked, they're underdeveloped, they have closed eyes, fairly similar to a human baby. We can see, but we really can't do anything. And then the precocial ones, they're born fully developed, they're basically ready to go. They have fur, they have open eyes. So it just kind of depends. In both cases, whether they're altricial or precocial, mothers will nurse the offspring and then they care for them until they're weaned because they are mammals. Some species can have several litters a year like rats and mice, but some like our porcupines and our beavers, they're larger. They have one litter and it's often one, maybe two young a year. So they put a little bit more investment into them because they have so few young. But most of the time rodents are known for being those prolific breeders and it's really helped them colonize different habitats. So they can have multiple litters and then they can do it fairly quickly. I can't remember the statistic, but if you take one mouse, it only takes like up to, and Amber, you might know this, it's like what, 7 days or like a week or something, or 7 weeks for them to become over 1 million. So if this one mouse has 6 babies, so 6 babies have 6 babies, 6 babies, blah, 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 blah. I think there's like a certain number of time it gets to like one mouse to get to
like
one.
It's a math in nature, it's exponential growth because it's so rapid.
Yes.
Just to clarify really quick, Monica, sorry, Johnny asked if naked mole rats bark. I think maybe what they mean, because it sounds like they said, I heard a bark. Maybe they saw them at the Lincoln Children's Zoo or somewhere. My understanding is that they certainly squeak and they certainly like communicate via that, but do you have any additional?
I don't know about the actual like barks, but they do actually make quite a bit of noise. Yeah. So if you ever watch them like the Omaha or Lincoln Zoo, they do make quite a bit of noises, just like most other rodents. Like Amber said, they squeak, but like prairie dogs, they can make a bunch of different like barks and yips and things like that. I'm not sure if it's that advanced, but they do definitely squeak and make normal rodent noises, I guess. Yes. Good questions. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about rodent teeth. This is really what makes these animals different than other mammals. So if you were here for our very first Science of back in January, I talked a little bit about rodent teeth, but overall it was mostly just like types of teeth and things like that. And I had a slide that said rodents are weird. Pretty much, they just have these strange different things that sets them apart from different mammals and different animals. So I wanted to talk a little bit about their teeth. Most of the time, people again remember that the word rodent means to gnaw. So they are chewers. And they have usually the larger animals, you can see it more, you can see it better, like the nutria and the beavers and the porcupines. They have these very large, like chisel shaped 2 front teeth. So this is where the name like bucktooth and beaver kind of take hold, but they use them because they need them. There's such a big adaptation for those animals. So, so all rodents, no matter what they are, they have continuously growing rootless incisor teeth. So these are mostly for them gnawing on plant matter or plant material. Now, remember, we did talk about like the grasshopper mouse is technically carnivorous. they still have the front two teeth, but their back cusps are a little bit more sharp and pointy, depending on because they're carnivores. They eat sharp things. They have to tear and chew things. Things like a rodent or like a beaver or a porcupine, they have a little bit more flat molars and teeth. But no matter what they are distinguished from other mammals, rodents, because they have 16 teeth. 2 pairs of incisors, they work like scissors. So if you've ever used scissors, you know that they work together to gnaw and to chew or to cut. They grow continuously, like I talked about, from birth, and they are rootless. So they must constantly be used to wear them down. So this is a little bit different than animals that have like diphyodont teeth, where they get a set and then they lose them. These guys are rootless and they continuously just grow. They don't fall out or anything like that. They just continuously grow. They also have a very heavy coating of enamel on them. This is simply so that enamel will wear down more slowly. And if an incisor is even broken, that can cause the animal to die because they cannot eat properly. And that is a huge thing for rodents. So if they break one of those big front incisors, it's not good at all. All right, so rodents have very similar structure of a skull to another mammal. The only difference is this yellow highlighted part here, this diastema. So you can see these 2 huge like front teeth, and then there's kind of a gap. There is no teeth right here, and then they start with their molars and their premolars. So this gap is used differently in different types of rodents. It's not actually unique to rodents. Rabbits have this too. And when we look at the fossil record, for rodents to have this diastema, it's actually, they're latecomers to the game. There was lots of things that had it before them, but they've kind of used it to their advantage. And again, they use it for different things. So for instance, wombats also have this, hyraxes, aye-ayes, lagomorphs. None of these things are rodents, but they also have that diastema. So basically, again, it's that gap between the lower incisors and the molars and the premolars. All right, so here is this one is a beaver skull that's in this photo, but you can clearly see that gap right here. So here's their 2 front incisors, here's the diastema, and then here is their molars and premolars. So basically that diastema allows animals to suck in their cheeks or their lips to shield their mouth and their throat. So when they're gnawing on something, they want to make sure that whatever the flying chips of wood or whatever, it does not get into their mouth or into their throat. So it's basically a way to keep that stuff out when they're eating. When rodents actually chew, they use their molars and premolars, and then any special muscles basically keep their incisors out of the way. So they look like they'd be kind of unruly to eat. So that diastema helps to keep things from coming in. And then there's special muscles that keep the incisors out of the way when they're using their premolars and their molars. Some species, they have cheek pouches depending on the type of animal that it is. Like for instance, the flying squirrels have really large cheek pouches that they will use to put food in. Other animals, this really helps keep like indigestible items out of their mouth. So if it's a squirrel, they want the inside of the nut, not the shell. So this helps keep that stuff out of their mouth as well. And then the main muscle that rodents will use is called the masseter muscle. And depending on how the muscle moves around their eyes and their face and their cheeks, these guys are divided into 3 different groups. It's basically how they use that muscle and their chewing method, and how that muscle controls the gnawing. All right, so the first one is our Sciuromorpha. So these guys are like your squirrel-like rodents. So squirrels, beavers, geomyids, heteromyids. So if you don't know what those are, I don't expect you to know what those are. So geomyids are things like pocket gophers. And then the heteromyids are things like pocket mice or kangaroo rats. So this is how their muscle kind of fits. So the lateral muscle or the masseter muscle moves forward and attaches to this thing called a zygomatic arch, which is kind of up by your eyes. This is where it meets your rostrum or your nose. And then the origin of this muscle kind of shifted forward. And then a zygomatic arch is actually developed into this larger structure called a zygomatic plate. So basically it extends out of the snout in front of the eye is like a really layman's way of saying all what I just said. So this is kind of, I think this is a squirrel skull, and you can kind of see that zygomatic plate here, and then the muscles that move around and how they move up and down. So this is one group that does this. Another one is the Myomorpha. These are things like mice and rats. So same type of muscles. Again, they're just in a different area. So what happens is these guys believe that it originated from that Sciuromorpha and then developed into something else. So that zygomatic plate basically shifted anteriorly of the lateral masseter muscle. So basically it passes through this little slip instead, and instead of attaching up by the rostrum or the nose, it will attach up by the eye. So these are the most efficient jaw muscles because these are the ones that are going to be gnawing a lot. They contain most of the species of rodents, but also things like rats, voles, lemmings, your muskrat will have them. It's just a little bit different way those muscles kind of move with each other. All right, and then your last one is your Myomorpha. These are the kind of like the cavy-like rodents, which if you look them up, they're kind of, I mean, they just look like a little bit larger or a smaller version of a capybara. So a little bit smaller, but again, just a different way their muscles go together. These guys have very large cheekbones and muscles that anchor to the side of their face. So this is going to be things like porcupines and those cavies. This group kind of has like a bizarre route that it goes with. No other mammals have a similar way that this medial masseter muscle will come together, but it helps with their diet because it's very, very thick and heavy as far as plant materials. So they're going to eat like berries and nuts and shoots and seeds, flowers, grains, that kind of stuff. They also think that some people also call this the hystricocomorphous, which basically takes this group and makes it another smaller group. But it just kind of depends on who you talk to. So some animals in this group can be carnivorous, or they can be grainivorous, which means they just simply eat grains. But most of them are going to be like herbivores, like the porcupines. All right, so here's like 3 of them together. It's nothing that you really need to know and can really observe, but just understanding that the way that those muscles go up and down and how they gnaw is different. And there's 3 different groups among the rodents. All right, so any questions as far as that so far?
So far, just some, whoa, I didn't know beavers were rodents, and a question about flying squirrel, the skin between the legs.
Yeah.
So just some fun comments, but
Cool.
mostly handy. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right, so I do want to talk a little bit about rodents and people because someone mentioned earlier, like the bubonic plague and the Black Death. There are definite pros, but there are cons and pros to rodents. A lot of people sometimes don't see the good that they have. One thing I do want to say is that there are very few rodent species that are responsible for like harmful activities. It's very, very few. So rodents have long been associated with people. Everywhere people go, rodents kind of followed, especially mice and rats. They basically have spread across the world because they've hopped on ships, they've been with people, and they're able to live alongside humans. Many rodents actually live in areas because people live there, which is very different than a lot of our other animals, which are like, I don't want around people. I don't want to be around people. Unfortunately, these guys are also known for being transmitters of those infectious diseases like the bubonic plague. A lot of introduction of rodents on islands, whether it was purposeful or an accident, they have led to extinction or very low numbers to threatened and endangered species of these things called ground nesting birds and other native animals. So just like any invasive species, they cause harm. That's the kind of the key vocabulary there for invasive species, that they are an introduced species or they are a non-native species that causes harm. So a lot of them have been viewed as pests. Their populations are controlled often by trapping and or poisoning. Unfortunately, that poisoning also leads to effects of other animals in the food web or the food chain. But again, only very few rodent species are responsible for human or for harmful activity. So there are pros to rodents. They provide many benefits to people and other animals. Some cultures eat them. There's a lot of people out there that will eat different types of rodents. There are guinea pig farms and capybara farms. They're farmed for their meat because they are larger. There are also pets. A lot of people have mice and rats and gerbils and hamsters. I don't know how many times you hear people talk about a class hamster or something like that. There's also some animals like chinchillas. If you've ever touched a chinchilla, you know that they're very soft and they have pretty kind of gray coats. They're used to make clothing a lot of the time. And we can't deny the fact that a lot of medical research, genetic research, and even early days of cosmetic research, and still today, white mice and rats have been used. A lot of rats have also been trained to locate things like landmines that are hidden under the soil. They're very smart animals. They're used in a lot of medical genetic research. People think they're stupid, but they're actually very intelligent animals. And we cannot deny that they are part of our ecosystem. There are many animals that eat them, like birds, reptiles. There's other larger mammals that will eat smaller rodents. So there are pros to them. A lot of people think there's nothing good about a rat or a mouse. That's not true. There's a lot of things that they're pros and cons. All right, I want to talk really quick a little bit about some of our Nebraska rodents that we have, and then we can open it up for questions. So. All right, I tried to pick a couple. Again, we have a lot of rodents and I wanted to pick some interesting or unique ones that we have. Many people are familiar with our kangaroo rat that we have out in western Nebraska. These guys, if you remember, they're kind of related to gerbils. They have very long back feet. This helps them jump. They can jump about 9 feet in one jump straight in the air, do a full 360, land, and then run the other way to escape their predators. These guys will live in underground burrows that they excavate themselves. They have very large eyes, like you can see in this photo here. So that means they're nocturnal. Oftentimes they live in areas that are very hot and dry. So they can sometimes become or kind of do that dormancy thing we talked about earlier, where they stay underground or they stay in a hole until the weather kind of conditions get more favorable. But these guys have very heavy cheek pouches on the sides that they carry seeds back to their burrows. And something that's neat is they can survive without ever drinking water. So they eat seeds and tubers, and that is basically all the water that they need. So you will never see probably one like lapping up water from a puddle. All right, this is a grasshopper mouse. I know Amber really likes these guys. She wrote a Trail Tales article for me last year and got my eyes open to these animals, but we do have grasshopper mice in Nebraska. They are nicknamed wolf mouse. So if you know anything about wolves, they howl at the moon. And that is exactly what this animal is doing here. So they're tiny little mice. They're kind of a brownish white color, and they have a very long tail. About a third of their body length is tail. Their teeth are a little different. So these guys are carnivorous, which means that they eat other animals. So they have the 2 front teeth, large orange teeth like most other rodents, but they also have really pointed cusps where their molars would be because they need to chew and grind all that extra animals that they're eating. They are nocturnal and they have a very intricate burrowing system that they will stay in throughout the day. And they get their name wolf mouse because not only do they howl at the moon, they literally howl at the moon. And they also, their activity is influenced by lunar phases and thermo or photoperiod and that kind of stuff. So how hot is it, the time of day, and then the lunar phases of the moon. So if you want to do something after this, Google grasshopper mouse and look at YouTube video, and you will see this mouse like throwing its head back and howling at the moon. So it's used for territory determination and then also just to communicate between other mice. All right. Porcupines. We have porcupines in Nebraska. Most people don't know that they're rodents, and most people don't know that we have them in Nebraska, but we do. They're out in western Nebraska. They like kind of the short grass prairie, the short grass, mixed grass prairie, depends on where you can find them, but they're arboreal. So that means they go in the trees. They are hairless soles so that they can climb trees, and they have really cool tracks. They could have up to about 30,000 quills on their body. Quills are actually hair. It's just a adapted piece of hair. They are tipped with barbs, the larger quills, and they have them everywhere on their face and on their body except for their stomach. So porcupine is an herbivore. They have the big two front teeth, the four big front teeth, I guess, and they will use those to chew up wood. It's kind of cool. We just did an animal love episode here the other night, and we talked about porcupines and what they do to mate. And what they will do is they have this elaborate dance. They're very vocal during this time. Females are only in estrus for about like 8 hours, 12 hours. So they gotta do it. And so what happens is they will actually spray, the males will spray urine all over the female. And if she decides she likes that, she likes the smell because that guy's been eating well, he has good genes, they mate. If they decide that she doesn't like that, then she will go find somebody else. These guys, they're not those prolific breeders like mice and rats. They have usually a single baby after 7 months. So it's a very long gestation time. They're normally solitary though. They may den with others during the winter, and they're very good swimmers. Who would have ever thought? So those quills are hollow, which makes them float. So they're actually fairly good swimmers when we talk about rodents. All right, prairie dogs. Prairie dogs get a lot of bad reputations. A lot of people don't like them, but they are true, what we call keystone species, or these ecological superheroes. So because of prairie dogs and the tunnels that they create and the activity that they do, they support at least 136 other species through their activities. So if we lose prairie dogs, we could possibly lose 136 other species as well. This is everything from birds and insects and salamanders and snakes. So they're very, very good animals to have in the ecosystem. They have very sharp claws, as you can see in this photo, and they have really strong teeth. We talked earlier about porcupines being in estrus for like 12 hours. These guys, they have like an hour. So they gotta do it. So they mate once a year in early fall. They have usually 3 to 8 pups in their litters, and they will be lucky if half of those survive. So they have a little bit bigger of a litter than things like beavers and porcupines. But they're very social. They have a very tight-knit group within their coterie, or their group of animals that they have. Their vocabulary is very advanced, like I mentioned earlier, but their range has shrunk about 95%. So if you ever have read early accounts of people that have come throughout the Great Plains, they noted prairie dogs. There was tons of them. Everywhere you look, they're prairie dogs. So their range has shrunk about 95%. What happened was there are a lot of purposeful killing, but then also when European ships came over, those rats and mice, they carried, again, Amber mentioned the fleas, and they carried that bubonic plague. It spread to other rodents. So things like squirrels and prairie dogs got the really big brunt of it. Another thing that these animals really help with is, if you've ever heard of an endangered species called the black-footed ferret. We don't have them in Nebraska, but we have the habitat for them. They're a super big endangered species. Prairie dogs are their main food source. So again, if we lose prairie dogs, we're going to lose ever having those endangered animals come back, those black-footed ferrets. All right, beavers. They are the largest living rodents in North America. We have them in Nebraska. They're very similar, if you know what a capybara is. They're just a little bit smaller, but they are semi-aquatic animals. So they spend a lot of time in the water, and their back feet are webbed. Their tail is a little bit different. It's kind of like that scaly, leathery looking thing. And they do have some sparse hairs on it, but most of the time they use it as a rudder. So again, they're semi-aquatic, they're in the water quite a bit, and they use this to move and to change directions in the water. They will also use it to warn other beavers if there's danger. They will slap the water with it. And then it also serves as a balance when they're walking. Something that I just learned like 2 years ago is that they store fat in their tail, and their tail will get larger. And then over time during the winter, about springtime, their tail will shrink in size because they're using up all those fat reserves. So the more fat reserves, the bigger the tail. They are another keystone species. So they create habitats for many other animals. A lot of people don't like them because, again, they're considered pests because they dam up rivers, but they create a ton of habitats for other animals, things like fish and birds and insects, even other mammals. So again, we've just seen 2 rodents that, you know, a lot of people don't like rodents. They are considered those keystone species. So prairie dogs, beavers. They will also mate for life, which we don't see a lot in other rodents. but they do kind of live in colonies, depending, it could be anywhere from 2 to 12. Again, those really tight-knit groups, family members, and then they are mostly nocturnal. Occasionally you will see them during the day, that's not rare, but they are mostly nocturnal animals. All right, and our last one, so southern flying squirrels, we have in Nebraska. They're mostly found within that southeastern part. If you've ever been to Indian Cave State Park, that's usually where we tell people that you could find one. They are considered a threatened species in Nebraska. They have this kind of white underbelly, these really large, big eyes that gives you a hint that they might be nocturnal, which they are. They are strictly known for flying among the trees. Again, they're not true flyers, they glide. Someone asked earlier about what that wing-like membrane was called. It's called a patagium, and you can kind of see it here. It's like this extra little layer of skin on their underbelly. So when they jump, they go to the top of the tree, they spread their arms and they jump. One thing that's cool is that they're very agile. They can steer around branches or obstacles, and a lot of that steering is done with their tail. These guys do not hibernate, so you could possibly still see them. In Nebraska, they are mostly found in that southeast edge along the Missouri River. But if you've been paying attention to the news, you know that back in December, right before Christmas, they found a couple of flying squirrels on East Campus, which is kind of neat because we didn't know they were there. Maybe they've been there this whole time. Maybe it's a new population. So Game and Parks is actually actively investigating right now. We're looking at doing some DNA samples between the ones that live down in South Indian Cave State Park and then the ones that are here. And then also trying to determine like where they came from. They did put up a couple of nest boxes on East Campus as well. They have not checked them yet to see if they've been using them. But what happened was it was kind of an accident they found them. There was a grounds crew that was cutting down an old oak tree, and all of a sudden they were up there and they saw this like head poke out, and they were like, well, that's not a squirrel. Like it is, but not the normal squirrels that they normally see. And so they determined that it was a southern flying squirrel. Also, I didn't know that there also have been other sightings in Lincoln. In 2019, there was found one in the Eastridge neighborhood, which is an area in Lincoln. 6 more were found in the College View area in 2020. And then 2 more last year in 2021 were found at West A and the Country Club neighborhoods. So they're here, but maybe they've just gone undetected for so long, and we're now just kind of finding them. So we're actively investigating the population. They're going to be doing some DNA samples, and I'm sure that you will hear more about these flying squirrels that have been found in Lincoln. So I think that's it. Yes. So that was our rodents. That was a lot of information. Hopefully you learned about some rodents. Next week, we will do earthworms. So we're switching it up. Next week, we're going to be talking about earthworms. People know them, they play with them, but do you really know about them? So do they have a mouth? Like what animal group they belong to? If you ask a normal person and ask what a worm is, an earthworm, they're like, I have no idea. So they do a lot of cool things. They're underground engineers. We're going to talk about them next week. And then we have earthworms. And then March 3rd, we're going to talk about salamanders. And then we will actually be done for this series. And then we'll start again in July. So if you really like this, I will send an evaluation to everyone that registered for this, that will give you a link to watch this again or send it to some friends that maybe weren't able to watch it. We also have a wildlife education Facebook page. We have an Instagram page, and then we also have our normal just wildlife education website that you can check out as well. All right, join me next week for earthworms. All right, I'm stop sharing. So like I mentioned, I will send everyone an evaluation in their email that registered. If you would be so kind and fill out an evaluation, that would be great. We'll give you some resources as well, all about rodents that you can check out. And then also, if you fill out a evaluation for us, you'll get some free swag. So we appreciate it. So thanks for everyone for joining us today. Do we have any questions or anything about rodents?
Nothing in particular. There was some cool comments on beavers and some other stuff, but I think we got most of it. And also a lot of folks just asked about the recording, and I mentioned that you were gonna for sure send that email, but also I put the link to the playlist in the chat as well.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, give us about 24 hours or so and this will be up on our YouTube channel. So I appreciate that. I also see that someone has a rodent sniffing around, Kim, on your video.
Oh
Those
my
are,
gosh.
yeah, right. I just saw that. My cavies are watching with me. So that's kind of cool. Very
Wow.
interesting. I'm glad they were able to watch rodents today. That's great.
Incredible. How cool. That's always been a dream of mine to have one of those as a pet, but I thought it was just a dream. And now I know maybe I can do it.
It's possible. Yeah. All right. Well, if there aren't any more other questions, thanks everyone for joining us, and hopefully we will see you next week. Someone asked how to reach the YouTube recordings there. I think Amber put it in a couple times, but I will also be sending out a evaluation that will have that link in there too. So don't fret. We will do that. Thanks everyone. Thanks, Amber.